Jung is the founder of analytical psychology. He is a psychiatrist and really did probe the consciousness of people. But what many people don't know is that Carl Jung was fascinated by mediumship. He grew up in the late 19th century and studied with Sigmund Freud. Freud was his theory. Freud was a materialist, a devout materialist, and I believe he also was an atheist as well, whereas Jung was not. Jung was fascinated also by religion and mysticism, and he incorporated those things into his psychology that he developed. But what people don't know is that Jung also was a had a cousin by the name of Helene who was a medium, and Jung was fascinated by mediumship. He was living at a time when, of course, mediumship, particularly physical mediumship, was very prominent, where there were seances occurring in parlors and churches throughout certainly the UK, parts of the United States, and into Europe as well. But his cousin was mediumistic, and this intrigued him. And it was an area of interest for Jung throughout his entire life. He actually, in his doctoral dissertation, he actually studied one or more mediums to understand from a psychological perspective what was going on. Now, Jung never did, he struggled with whether mediumship actually was something that, well, whether he accepted the notion of communication from those who have passed on. He also struggled with the notion of the spirit world. At first, he was intrigued and actually made several statements where he was convinced by the evidence. But Jung was also a doctoral student who wanted to get his dissertation approved. And so in his dissertation, he shifted the focus of his studies to talk about mediumship in a purely psychological form. But again, this experience of mediumship and the connection with the spirit world and the spirit and spirituality in general was part of his and influenced him through his entire life. Now, another scientist that I'm very interested in is David Bohm, which I've talked about in the past. And Bohm has this notion of basically everything in this world has both a spiritual aspect, which he didn't call it that. He called it a information wave. But to me, it's the same as the soul or the spirit. And of course, a physical manifestation. And everything is in this process of a vibratory type of existence, where information is coming from the world of spirit and informing us, and also information from our experiences in this world is also being fed back to the world of spirit and our souls. So, and Jung had a very similar notion, actually. So Jung talks about consciousness as, that there is both consciousness and unconsciousness, and that there's a flow as well from the unconscious to the conscious, which I'll talk more about. He also talked about a collective psyche or collective soul. Now, much of what he talked about in terms of this notion of a collective soul had to do with the influences of family, society, community, etc., that creates this collective sort of knowledge that informs us and influences us. But there were times when he went further than that. Here is an example of what Jung talks about in terms of consciousness, right? There are different elements. There is a personal consciousness, there's a personal unconsciousness, and there is a collective consciousness. There are different parts of this bigger self that Jung talks about. There's the persona, which is a mask that we put on, and is largely influenced by what we believe other people want to see of us, and parts that people do not want to see of us, or who we feel are unacceptable to others, become parts of what Jung called the shadow. And of course, there's the ego, which is basically the manager between the conscious and unconscious, and of course, our everyday awareness and experience. All this together formed the self. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see here the unfolding and enfolding that I talked about from Bohm. Uh, Jung talked about a similar process, Again, didn't use those words because Bohm was writing about this in 1980, which was after Jung passed away. But Bohm talked about basically an explicit order, which was basically that what is manifested in this world, and the implicate order, which is the ground of being that exists underlying all of the physical world. And so I kind of extended here what Jung's talked about and what Bohm's talked about, and talked about an internal spirit world, the world of spirit, and the external physical world, and how basically these parts, how this information flows between those two worlds. So Jung also talks about individuation, which is basically becoming an individual. And what he says about this is that we becoming individuals when we are able to accept our uniqueness. And that's important to recognize. Each and every one of us are unique, and we have something unique to offer this world. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't be here, right? And so individuation, from Jung's perspective, implies becoming one's own self, self-realization. And to do this, according to Jung, we need to be able to accept those shadow aspects of ourselves and also shed the persona. The shadow and the persona develop, for good reasons. We are taught from our early years about what's okay and what isn't okay. And sometimes we are taught that, our great gifts that we've been given are not acceptable. And so they're hidden, buried beneath this mask that we wear, which is truly sad. Truly sad for an individual to walk through life where they cannot express their true self in this world. And from Jung's perspective, this can lead to depression. A person will experience persistent and enduring depression. When you think about it, you go back to the 1950s, for example, that was a time when women were really expected to stay at home and raise children. For many women, that was not the way in which they wished to manifest their uniqueness in this world. And so, there was a high portion of depression and unhappiness in women during those years. That has changed. But again, it isn't just about gender here. It's about any facet of ourselves that is repressed, that is not being able to be manifested in this world. It can lead to some real challenges. Likewise, our experience in walking through this world can also provide us opportunities to learn how to recognize our persona as well as our shadow aspects that can, through awareness, can be integrated and moves us towards this individuation Jung talks about. So, in terms of this process of individuation, basically there are two primary processes that Jung talks about. There is active imagination, where we use our imagination to allow whatever we are imagining to come forward. You can do that through art, through writing, through journaling, a whole bunch of different ways, where the mind's just free to express itself. And we begin to find that there are different images, different experiences that occur. Likewise, their dreams. Dreams. How many here have experienced dreams that kind of provided some guidance or suggested, or perhaps a warning, or perhaps something that speaks about our life today? Yes. Yes. So dreams are our source of guidance as well, that come from our unconscious minds, from our soul, if you like, that can provide a sense of guidance to us, as can active imagination. They both kind of work the same way, and they both there's a process that one can follow to interpret them that will help us develop a sense of guidance from that source. Again, how many here have experienced recurrent dreams, dreams that are repeated in some way over and over again? Yes, okay. Yes, again, typically that is the soul trying to really wanting us to get the message that there may be either something about ourselves that we need to acknowledge and accept, or it may be something about what's going on in our lives and something that we need to express in this world, or something about a relationship we have with others. But again, it does speak to this notion of something that needs to be attended to. And that's why we keep having these recurrent dreams. And that's why they will continue to happen until we address them. Because um, the soul will always encourage us. We will always have this sense. It may be a sense of emptiness or a sense of just a need to do something. And the soul will continue to remind us each and every day to encourage us to move along our path. The founder of transpersonal psychology, Arthur Dykman, talked about awareness, and what he basically said is awareness. The soul, who we are, is really behind our everyday thoughts and awareness. Basically, we are the observer that observes, right? And a lot of clients that I work with, because I am a part-time counselor with Calgary Counseling Center, a lot of the work that we do sometimes is just to help individuals kind of create some space between their thoughts and feelings and themselves, the observer. And when we create that space, then the thoughts and feelings, they recognize that the thoughts and feelings we're experiencing aren't about who we are. It's about our experience. Because sometimes thoughts can be pretty critical, pretty negative, that can really drive us down into a feeling, despair, depression, etc. But once we create some space for that and recognize that these are just thoughts that kind of pass by like leaves in a stream, and that we have some ability to let them go or even change them, suddenly then that can really result in a shift. So that's Dykman says basically our soul, our self is the part of us that observes those thoughts, our thoughts. We are more than our thoughts and our feelings. We are much more than that. Another writer who comes from a Eastern tradition, mindfulness, is, of course, Michael Singer, who wrote The Untethered Soul. It's a wonderful book to read. He talks about that consciousness is basically about awareness and where we focus it. And we can reach our highest state of awareness when we focus on that higher self, on that soul. Experiences, just as I mentioned earlier, are meant to just kind of pass through us. He basically states that our true self or soul is the observer which observes, just like Arthur Dykman. And it's the observer who observes the response when we ask, who am I? And if you've ever done this exercise, just asking yourself who you are, you could even take a pencil and paper and write down what your mind tells you you are. And you'll find that as you reflect on and keep asking the same question and over again, you go deeper because indeed who you are is kind of like layers. And what Singer talks about basically is that these layers are parts of ourselves that we identify with. But as we recognize that these are not who we are, then of course we go deeper and deeper and deeper. And you can ask yourself this question over and over again, go deeper and deeper and deeper. You finally get to something more of an essence of self, kind of like what Jung talked about in terms of moving past the persona to the deeper part of who we are. Um, we can lose ourselves when we identify with these thoughts or feelings or the persona of who we believe we are, right? And they become self-reinforcing, that we will project ourselves onto an object or onto something that we believe ourselves to be, and it can become profoundly limiting as well. Um, Now, this can lead to blocked energy, both in terms of our inability to express ourselves in this world, but also there would be feelings, experiences that we resist, that we don't want to look at. Again, this kind of relates back to the the persona and the and the shadow side of ourselves, right? So Singer basically says closing our awareness to disturbing experiences suppresses them. Again, they get split off into this shadow side of ourselves. And as we do that, of course, these energy patterns he describes draw more and more energy from us. They block energy, as the flow of energy as well. And so we can become quite depleted because of this. Freeing the soul basically means to let go of these parts of ourselves, to accept them, to allow the energy to flow. So whenever you find you feel a tightening or feeling of constriction, that's the cue it's time to grow, letting go of that part of you that you are tempted to defend, and to stop and allow yourself to experience the experience and let it go. That's what Singer talks about. And it kind of fits again with this notion of the persona, right? If we are defending something we believe ourselves to be, or someone's criticism of something, we need to recognize that when we feel that constriction, there's an opportunity here to reflect on it, to accept it and let it go. Here's a few metaphors here. So in terms of changing ourselves, we need to become aware that, when we really restrict ourselves into this, believing that we are very small and very limited, and we allow the persona to be in control, and we adopt beliefs that are very self-limiting, and we fail to accept parts of ourselves, both good and bad, if you want to use those labels, then of course we are like an egg in a shell, but we have unlimited potential. When we listen to the call of the soul, again, through dreams, through active imagination, even through our interpersonal encounters and the edges that we experience around different feelings that arise, we begin to move on our path. And so these edges I was talking about, these can be things like insecurity, fear, envy, jealousy, anger, possessiveness, etc., right? They're not bad, but there are signals that something needs our attention. So basically, when we react to something with these feelings, they're trying to get our attention, and that these shadow aspects can be integrated if we attend to them. And again, our dreams, our imagination will always give us a path to address them. The good news is that we'll keep recycling them until they're released. The bad news is we'll keep recycling them until they're released. But of course, our soul will never, ever stop encouraging us, as will our loved ones in the spirit world. Through introspection, through looking at ourselves, to tending to our edges and letting go of limited perception of ourself and our identification with the persona, we can begin to be free, right? But it involves looking at ourselves. That's where this cocoon metaphor comes in. Basically, you realize when you really reflect on and allow yourself to embrace your shadow side, to let go of your persona so much in terms of what you believe other people expect you to be, then you realize that you're not who you thought you were. You're not even a human being, according to Singer. You have just happened to be watching one. And I would say it's not so much you're not a human being, it's what you are, is you are a soul, you are a spiritual being inhabiting a physical body. And you will begin to have deep experiences with your own center of consciousness. These will be deep, intuitive experiences of your true nature of self. And you'll find that you are tremendously expansive. What that basically means is that you are much greater than you ever thought you were. So once we have let go of our persona and embrace some of our shadow side, and began to experience this expansive awareness, we become like butterflies, not bound to the earth. We're tenacious on our journeys, and we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. We're beings of air and soul, and we really do begin to feed on the nectar of the experiences of life, because every experience, both challenging and uplifting, is truly empowering and feeds us if we allow it to do so. So, just before we wrap up, in the end, Jung, according to Shem Dasani, who is probably the world's foremost historian on Jung and his life, basically said at some stage, Jung became convinced of the post-mortem survival of bodily death, and hence of the possibility of communication from beyond the grave, as well as reincarnation. One wonders whether this may have led him to ponder anew the question of the verticality of some of his communications from the dead and of their intertwined anterior lives, which is basically to say that Jung certainly embraced the notion of immortality and began to rethink his early interpretation of the patients who were mediumistic that he encountered. in terms of the stuff that I was able to sort through in terms of Jung's writings, I was able to find this statement here. And he said in 1969, actually 1961, 1959, because he passed away earlier, passed away in the early 60s. But this is from a book that was published in 1969. The fact that we are totally unable to imagine a form of existence without space and time by no means proves that such an existence in itself is impossible. The hypothetical possibility that the psyche touches a form of existence beyond space and time presents a scientific question mark that merits serious consideration for a long time to come. So again, it's funny. Jung's early experiences were, again, as I said, informed by the mediumistic phenomenon around him, and he contemplated that question throughout his entire life. And he appears, at least at this point, before he is passing, that he was still open to the possibility. And according to Shem Dasani, that he embraced this notion. But anyway, so that's my talk for today on Jung and mediumship.